Hello, my name is Andrew Hall and I'm a product manager at UiPath. Today, I want to talk to you about our governance capabilities in UiPath Studio and StudioX with a specific focus on StudioX and how you can use governance to comfortably roll out a citizen development program within your company. I should state also at the beginning that the features that I cover in this talk are based on our 20.10.4 release of Studio and StudioX. Many of these capabilities exist back to 20.4, and obviously if you're using a newer version, you'll likely have more capabilities. If you could take one thing away from me today, I'd like you to take away that our governance and built-in auditing capabilities give you a way to confidently scale a citizen developer program by knowing that the appropriate guardrails and history tracking is in place. To get started, let's take a look at the policy settings and how we can put the appropriate guardrails in place to make sure that users are following our organizational best practices so we can have confidence that they're not doing something that's going to be harmful to the organization in their automation. I'm going to start with a few examples of guardrails that we let you put in place that are extremely popular requests. First, we're going to let you control what applications and websites users may or may not automate. This has been our top request. Many organizations have sensitive applications or via license agreements, applications that automation cannot be used against. And it's hard for citizen developers to always know what the rules are. And so we give you a way to put those policies in place so that you can make sure that if a user tries to do something they shouldn't do, they're going to receive an error and they're going to be blocked from even doing the wrong thing. Next thing we want to control is we want to help you control your security by being able to control where users can install activity code from. What this means is that you have full control over every piece of code that comes into your organization and where it's coming from. Whether you want to leave it open or whether you want to restrict it to something that you control every single activity package is added to, you have the full control. We also let you control what specific activities and packages may be used. So for example, there may be certain packages that communicate with cloud services, and due to data sovereignty or organizational policies around data remaining within a firewall, you don't want your users using. Again, just like the applications and websites, this may not be something that users are equipped to always know or are going to be able to find the documentation at the time that they're using it. And so what this does, you put the guardrail in place, the user gets an error, and they're not going to do the wrong thing. Secure password practices and automation projects, you can ensure that users are following best practices, that they're not accidentally storing their hard-coded passwords in their process, such that if they share it with another user, they aren't accidentally giving away their credentials. These were a few examples of popular things that we've been asked for, but it should be noted that almost any setting you can find in Studio or StudioX is something that you can govern. And you can do that using our governance policy, and all of this is of course documented on our docs website. No talk on governance capabilities is complete without talking about Workflow Analyzer. Workflow Analyzer in many ways is at the heart of making sure that your employees are building high quality compliant automations. It automatically runs rules whenever the user builds a project, which can occur either on build, whenever they run, or whenever they publish. We've built in many rules for common cases. These are things that generalize based on the feedback and research that we've done across organizations. But if what we provide doesn't fully meet your needs, you have the ability to create custom rules to extend the capabilities. So there's almost anything a user can do, you can put rules in place to make sure that they're doing that in a way that you're comfortable with as an organization. This is not the complete list of built-in rules into the product, but the rules that we have built in that let you put governance in place, not necessarily just focusing on best practices. I've already talked about app URL restrictions. Package restrictions let you prevent the use of specific packages. Activity restrictions prevent or only allow the use of specific activities. Insecure password use, detecting hard coding passwords into a workflow. And then required packages is something where if you develop custom workflow analyzer rules or custom activities that you want your employees to use, you can require that their projects take a reference to those, which makes sure that they will be available in that particular project whenever it's built or run. And with that, let's switch over and take a quick look at how the governance capabilities work and how they can be configured. Here we are in StudioX, and I want to start by configuring my workflow analyzer rules. What we're going to do is we're going to use StudioX as our design surface for our governance policy, configure it to behave like we want, and then export that into a policy that will be enforced for users such that they can't change our settings. As I mentioned earlier, the heart of governance is on the tops of the workflow analyzer settings. And so we have some built-in rules for this. I'm just going to click on name to sort them by name so that I can find them more easily. Activity restrictions, not something I care about right now, so I'm going to go ahead and disable that rule. It does not need to run for users. App URL restrictions. This is one that I care about a lot, and there's a couple different options. So first thing we can have the ability to control is desktop applications that users work with. I can either choose to prohibit specific applications. So for example, if I were to say iexplore.exe, this would prevent the user from working with Internet Explorer, but allow them to work with any other application on the machine. Or the other option I can do is I can be more restrictive and create an allowed list. And an allowed list allows only applications that are in the list to work. For the purposes of this, let's just restrict our employees to working with Chrome because that's our standard browser. Same thing for URLs. I can either prohibit specific ones or only allow. For today, I'm going to go ahead and say I'm going to restrict my employees to just rpasamples.com. Alright, so that one's configured like we want. The other important thing is to set it to be an error, because setting it to be an error means that when a user fails to satisfy the requirements of the rule, it will actually block the run or publish because it can't build the project successfully. These are some best practices rules about not having empty activities in there. Insecure password use. Yep, I want to make sure that my employees are not doing insecure passwords, so we're going to up that from the default of warning to error. Package restrictions, this would allow me to prohibit specific packages. Don't need to do any of those today. Required packages, we'll come back and talk about this one in a minute. So for the moment, we'll leave that blank. Say value misuse, this just helps users, again, it's best practice, tries to prevent them from having errors. Undefined output properties and unused save for later. These are all best practices. So with that, let's go ahead and click OK. And I have some activities here that should violate several of the policies that we just configured. First of all, this is using the Edge browser rather than Chrome. And second of all, here into the password field, it's actually going to type a hard-coded string. My password's not really password. And it's also interacting with UiPath.com, which is not under rpasamples.com. So when I click Run, this should block me and it should trigger several errors. And indeed it does. I can see that I've triggered one that says that it's detected using this website, which is not an allowed URL as defined by my organization. It's detected that I'm using msedge.exe, which is not allowed per my organization, and that I'm typing plain text passwords, meaning I'm insecurely, right? The right behavior here would be to use a get username password activity. Let's save it for later, just to show that this will then catch that. So, right, I'll call it credentials. And then instead of typing in my password, I want to type in the credentials and the password value. I'm still going to be blocked by using Edge and not allowed against the website. Oh, I have to pick a credential error. And you can see that right now that it's caught me and it's steered me in the right direction. So now as a user, I would then need to switch this over to Chrome, and then obviously I would need to pick a website that I'm actually allowed to automate. The last thing I'm going to really highlight here before we export our policy is the importance of enforce analyzer before publish and enforce analyzer before run. These must be yes, because that's what caused, when I clicked run, the rules to be run and to check to make sure that I was doing this in a compliant way. So built-in rules are great, but what if as an organization I need to apply more policies than UiPath gives me the ability to by default? So there's two ways that I can get custom governance rules to this particular user's machine. The first way is to go here into my settings, say locations, and there's a way that I can load custom workflow analyzer rules from a path. And so I could, for example, provide a network share here. And what this means is that when the project loads, I have to close the project and reopen it to get these settings to apply. It's going to, when I open Workflow Analyzer, I can see now that it's loaded this extra rule, this org USG01 is mine. I chose to follow the naming convention of Studio, but I can see that I've introduced this concept of activity property requirements. So this is a custom rule that I've written that's going to let me look at any activity and enforce any specific value for a particular property. So for example, in this case, again, this is my own syntax, but I could apply the configuration to say that any activity of type mail X, so this would be send mail X or forward mail X or reply to mail X, with a property of draft, so there's a is draft checkbox on those, must be true. And so what this is going to do now is, for example, if I come here to mail and I say that I want to use my Outlook desktop and I want to send an email message to person@uipath.com, that this save as draft is going to have to be true. So if I uncheck this and I try to run, we're going to see that my own organization's custom rule is going to flag this, right? So I've now introduced a new governance policy for all of my StudioX users by saying that the save as draft rule, or save as draft property, must always be true. If I check save as draft now and click analyze, it's not going to get flagged. So one way to do that, as I mentioned, is to here in the locations specify a remote path to a share that's going to contain those rule DLLs. It's going to be read-only for this particular user. And that can be a good way to go if your organization has network shares that are available to all employees. However, we know that for many organizations, network shares are not necessarily an easy thing to make available to everybody in the organization. And so there's a second option that I have here. Let me close and reopen my project just to reset that. Okay, now we're back. When I open my Workflow Analyzer settings, I'm going to see that that custom rules disappeared. But let's say that a network share is not a great option for distributing custom rules to the company. The other way that I can do this is I can publish these in a custom package. So here in my Orchestrator tenant, I've created a NuGet package that I've uploaded as a library into Orchestrator. That's my org.sample governance rules. I want to take a dependency on this package with the custom rules, and that will also cause the rules to show up in the project. So once that finishes loading, when I open my Workflow Analyzer settings, I'm going to see that this is here. The configuration stayed, so I don't have to worry about resetting that. But the other thing I need to do to make sure that my employees are taking a dependency on this is I need to set a governance policy rule that says we're going to require that they reference this sample package. So here I'm going to say required packages is my org.sample governance rules. Fix that typo and click OK. And so now when I click analyze, it's just a quick way to make sure that I'm compliant. I'm not going to get an error. However, if I come in here and uninstall this, and I try to analyze or run, I'll see that I'm actually going to get an error here that says your organization requires you to take a dependency on my org.samplegovernancerules.package. So the required packages makes it really nice to distribute rules as NuGet packages through an Orchestrator feed rather than having to put things on a network share that's accessible to all the employees in the organization. Okay. Now that we have our policy configured like we want, what I can do is I can come to Help, I can click Generate Governance File, and it's going to export this. Let's just drop it on my desktop for the moment. And with that, let's go take a look at it here in this text editor. I've gone ahead and done a bit of cleanup. When it exported the policy, it would have had extra profiles, so one for business, which is StudioX, one for developer, which is Studio, and one for Studio Pro. I've deleted the Studio, or the Developer and the Studio Pro profile from here, and deleted some of the extra configuration settings that only apply to Studio and Studio Pro, just to make this easier for us to work with. But this should look pretty much like we just looked at in StudioX. And so now what I want to do is I need to test this. And the easiest way to test it, this is not a secure way to deploy it, but it is a good way to test it, is I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to drop it into the app data UiPath folder. So if I go %appdata %/UiPath, it'll open this. I can copy and paste the file here, and now when I restart StudioX, it will pick up that governance policy and I can make sure it's working like I expect. Okay, now that I'm back in StudioX, I'm going to go to the Help tab, and I can see here that the company policy has been picked up. So it's the sample governance policy file that it's been loading from that UiPath app data folder. And now when I go to things like my settings and say design, I can see that Enforce Analyzer Before Publish and Enforce Analyzer Before Run are on without the option for the user to turn it off, right? It tells me that it's governed by company policy. When I come here and open my project, okay, let me uncheck Save as Draft again, and let me try to run. It's going to flag 3 issues. If you recall, I removed the package last time I was there, so it's telling me that I'm required to take a dependency on my org.samplegovernance.rules package, and then I still have my issue with Edge and the URL that I'm not allowed to automate. If I open the Workflow Analyzer settings, I can see that I can see what's configured for me as a user. So for example, the required packages, I can see that I'm required to take a dependency on this rule, but I can't change anything. It's read-only for me, just like the publish settings were in the IDE. Okay, the last thing I want to show, because of the custom governance rules capabilities, is we've added the ability to create templates for users in StudioX. So if I want everybody in my organization to start a new project in a compliant way, I can create a template in StudioX. I can then add the dependency for them to the custom governance rules. So let me click cancel right here and click run to show that this is going to trigger an error, right? It's going to tell me that we're required to have a dependency on it. So manage packages, tenant feed, let's install that. Now that everybody is compliant, I click run, it passed, it's not going to do anything. I can go ahead and publish this. I can make this available to all of my users on the Orchestrator libraries feed. Let me go ahead and click publish. Okay, and then now when my StudioX users or Studio users come in, because I published it, it's already visible here, but if I was on a different machine, they could click more templates or access templates from here, and they would see the template. And when they start from the blank template, it will ensure that they are fully compliant because they already have a dependency on the custom governance rules, and so Analyze will pass for them. Okay, the final thing I want to talk about is how to enable a governance policy in a secure way such that all of your users pick it up. There's 2 different ways that we can do this. The way that has existed up to now, and is still perfectly valid, is to set a registry key on the machine that points to a remote policy file. So for example, put it on a file share or in blob storage, and then as part of the install script, set this registry key, the governance source, to point to the file, and the user's machines will automatically pick that up. However, we've heard from a lot of organizations that this was not their preferred way of doing it, and so one of the new ways that we've added of doing this in 20.10.3 is we've given the ability to configure this via Orchestrator. So there's two options. Just like I could do from the registry, I can set the UiPath.studio.governance source registry key. It must be in this UiPath.settings.config folder, so that both names must match exactly. So UiPath.settings.config is the folder, and then UiPath.studio.governance source, and I can point to a remote file, just like I could from the registry key. However, another option that we've added, which we suspect many people will choose as their preference, is to set this value here and actually copy the JSON contents of the policy. So this should be, get rid of the underscore that was just there as a placeholder. So UiPath.studio.governance policy, and I can go here into my text editor, and I can copy the contents. I can paste that here as the value of the asset, and if I want, I can even add specific values for specific users this way. I can go ahead and click Update. So now this policy is set for my users, and when they launch StudioX, and I go here to the Help tab, I'll see that the policy has been loaded, and when I hover over this, it'll show me that it's been loaded from the Orchestrator and from the UiPath.studio.governance policy asset. Okay, the second thing I want to talk about is how the automatic logging built into the activities in StudioX means that there's no more shadow IT problem. When we talk about shadow IT, what we mean is automation assets that the organization depends on to function, but nobody knows about them except the person that creates them. For example, this has been a common problem with Excel spreadsheets and macros in various Office files, where you have the person whose job is to work with these numbers, for example, someone in finance. They create this incredibly complicated Excel spreadsheet that may rely on formulas that other people don't understand and macros that other people don't understand. And it turns out the business is dependent on this, and the person gets a promotion and they leave that role, or they leave to go to another organization, and all of a sudden people realize that they don't know how to run the business anymore because they don't understand how this spreadsheet works, or this Access database, or something like that. So one of the things that StudioX does is at runtime, all of our activities log important information into the robot logs without the user taking any action at all. So assuming a user is connected to Orchestrator, which is a best practice that we recommend that you license through Orchestrator, which will then ensure that they are connected, information is going to automatically be recorded about what these robots are doing on behalf of the user. Specifically, we're going to capture what initiated the run, so you're going to be able to understand, are users running these things from Assistant, StudioX, Studio, and of course in the case of unattended Orchestrator, that's not really applicable in the context of StudioX. The second thing that we're going to capture is the time, the process name, and the user that ran it. So anytime somebody starts an automated process in your organization, you can go back in the logs and you can again see where did they run it from, who ran it, when did they run it, and what process did they run. And then what the activities are going to log is they're going to make sure that you have a high-level overview, which from a regulatory compliance perspective will give you a good view so you can record all the important actions that they've done, as well as making sure that you have your thumb on what these robots are doing, and if you need to reach out to and follow up with those employees to learn more about that, to make sure it's properly documented, things like that. Again, all this can be automated by querying the logs. You're not relying on employees to tell you about their automations. You can actually go build queries and know what their automations are doing. Specifically, StudioX activities are going to record any application interaction they have. So it's going to, for a desktop application, record the application name. If it's a website, it's going to record the URL and the browser type that was used. We're also going to record data scraping specifically. Again, this is incredibly important for regulatory and audit purposes to know what that robot did. We're also going to record resource use. When we talk about resource, we're going to record when they open a Word file, Excel file, when they use an email account, which email account was used. For example, if people are accessing or working with multiple shared accounts, you're going to know what each and every one of those was. We're also going to be able to see anytime an employee creates an email, who they sent it to, right? Not just the to line, but the CC and the BCC line. We're going to obviously know which account it was created from, and then we're going to be able to tell if it was a draft only or if it was actually sent. For example, thinking back to the governance we just saw, many organizations want humans to review emails before they're actually sent. So they want to say this should be a draft. For example, if it's going to go outside the company, you can send it if it's to a coworker, but if it's going to go outside the company, make sure that a human reviews it. We have all this information captured in the logs for us by default with StudioX without the user taking any action at all. So with that, let's go take a quick demo of what this looks like. Okay, I'm back in StudioX. I have a project here that is based off of one of the templates that we have built into the product, just extended a little bit. So it's going to go into this rpasamples.com. It's going to data scrape information from the table, store that into an Excel file, then create a PowerPoint file with some of that information, and then it's going to create an email draft to me with that generated file as an attachment. So let's go ahead and run this and then see what information is generated into our Studio logs for us by default. Okay, I can see that it's finished running. So what I want to do next is go over to Orchestrator and check a look in the logs. And I want to make note that I'm in my workspace because that's where the logs are going to be associated with. So I'm going to go to my workspace. I'm going to go to automations. And then I can see here in the logs, and I have the opportunity to filter, but we'll see that I can, all the information that I just did, let's go ahead and increase the number. I've run some other automations in here today, so there'll be more information. So let's look for started. And so blank template, we can see what we did previously. For example, if I say execution started, this was one of the ones we ran before. But let's find the most recent started. This is the create PowerPoint presentation from data scraping execution started. And I mentioned that we had the initiated by, so I can see that it was launched from StudioX. If it had been run from the assistant, that would say assistant instead of StudioX. I can see the name of the robot, right? This is what I've created in Orchestrator. I can see the user's window identity. So this is me, Andrew Hall. I can see when it started. And I can see the name of the process, which is this PowerPoint presentation, right? And then we have all these audit messages along the way. So I can see that it's using the web app, browser, Chrome URL. All of these are individual properties, so target URL, browser type, whether it's an audit message, and this was done to integrate nicely with UiPath Insights, because each of those properties are things that you can use as part of UiPath Insights to build dashboards and reports on. So for example, right, we can see that we use this web browser. We can then see that we did an extract data. It's telling me from where it came, right? This chrome.exe, sales opportunities. I can see that I used an Excel file. I can see that I used a presentation file, which is this PowerPoint, that I used my Outlook account, that I created an email via send Outlook email, that it was to me, and that it was a draft, and then I can see that the execution ended. So you can see that just by being connected to Orchestrator, we have a really complete picture of what our application was doing. All right, so with that, I want to do a quick review of what we saw today. We started by configuring our desired governance settings in StudioX. We were then able to generate a policy file using the built-in button in StudioX. It's also available in Studio. We made it available to users through Orchestrator. We then deployed custom rules to StudioX and required users to reference those. We created a template for users to start in the correct state so they wouldn't be in an error state by not referencing the package containing our custom rules. And then we looked at how all of the important actions performed by the robot were recorded such that we eliminated the shadow IT problem. And if we ever needed any audit records for compliance reasons, all of that information was available in our robot logs by default. So thank you for listening today.
Reboot.